So thank you everybody so much for coming this evening. My name is Kim Dorman. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Princeton Public Library. And I am delighted to be hosting this program this evening. As you can see, we're in the webinar format. So I think most people are used to using Zoom by now. At the moment, you can, if we have the chat function open, we also have Q&A. We'd ask you if you have any questions throughout the program to put them in the Q&A, and we'll try and get to them to the end. I think we've also enabled it so that if there's a question that somebody else asked, which you also want the answer to, just go ahead and upvote it, and then we'll make sure that one gets asked. So as we get started, I'd like to welcome or introduce each of the panelists and authors we have here this evening. Amy Impellizzeri is a reformed corporate litigator, former startup executive, and now an award-winning author of fiction and nonfiction. Amy's latest novel, I Know How This Ends, is a time-bending follow-up to her best-selling debut, Lemongrass Hope. Sadeqa Johnson is the award-winning author of 4 novels. Her accolades include the National Book Club Award, the Phillis Wheatley Book Award, and the USA Best Book Award for Best Fiction. Her latest novel, The Yellow Wife, came out last week and is generating lots of buzz. Kelly Simmons is a former journalist, advertising, creative director, and the author of 6 novels sold in 12 countries. Not My Boy is her latest novel, and it was published by Source Books. Tonight's event is called Focus on Fiction. For your most recent novels, you've, I'm sorry. Someone else wrote this, and so it's not necessarily coming naturally to me. So let me take a pause and say, please go out and buy copies of their books. You can do that at Labyrinth or your own local bookseller. But it's the best way that you can support these authors' works. We're going to start this evening just asking some sort of general questions for each of the authors to respond to, and then I'd like to invite each of the authors to read a little bit, a portion of their book, so you can get a sense of each of the books. Would you please give us a short introduction of yourself, your book, and how you came up with the inspiration for this particular story? And Kelly, since you're in my order, if you'd start, please.
Okay, hi, I'm Kelly Simmons, and I just want to say that the last panel that I did, I was introduced as being having written 6 books that were sold in 12 countries, and the very next person had written like 12 books sold in 102 countries, and I wanted to die. It was like I just wanted to shrink down. Anyway, one man's trash is another man's treasure, right? So
because Kelly, I would totally take all of that. If you don't want it, you could just pass it on over here and I will claim it and wear it proudly.
Yours sounds pretty good too, Sadeqa. And so does Amy, because I wanted to be a lawyer too. Amy has the life not traveled for me. But my book, Not My Boy, came out the first week of January. And it's about sisters who move next door to one another to fulfill a lifelong dream. And then events happen in the neighborhood that really tear their relationship apart. And I was inspired to write it because I'm very close to my sister and I always wanted to live next door to her. But because I write suspense, I wanted her to live next door to me and then, ruin her life. And so that's what I did.
Helpful if I don't mute. Ms. Johnson.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sadeqa Johnson. I am the author of Yellow Wife. It is my first historical fiction, my 4th novel. It came out, I think it was like January 12th. Well, I'm already forgetting, right? Time is like going by so quickly. And Yellow Wife is the story of a mulatto girl who lives on a plantation. It's pre-Civil War. She is the daughter of the master with his favorite slave, Ruth, who is the medicine woman, as well as the seamstress on the plantation. And Phoebe has been promised freedom on her 18th birthday. It's a promise that she's always had. She's always known. She's been favored a bit by the master's sister, who did not have children. who never married. And so she taught her how to read and how to write. And she taught her arithmetic. And especially she taught her how to play the piano. And so she always had this dream that she was going to be free. Well, a series of events happen. Things kind of take a turn for the worse, and Phoebe finds herself on the site of the Lapeer jail, which is in Richmond, which is one of the most horrific places on earth. She is liked or loved or something by the owner of the jail. She catches his eye, and so she has to figure out how to survive in this new world that she's not accustomed to, and she has to make very difficult choices for herself and her family.
Wow. Amy?
Hi. So my latest book is I Know How This Ends. This book actually came out just on the eve of the world shutting down in March of 2020. It is a follow-up to my debut novel, which Lemongrass Hope, which came out in 2014. And I wrote 3 standalone novels in between there. And Lemongrass Hope has somewhat of an ambiguous ending. And I would often go to book clubs and they'd ask me if I was going to write a sequel. And I always said no, because I really didn't think that there was another, I didn't want to do injustice to the various ways that people had sort of interpreted the ending. And then I came up with this idea of how the story could end. And it became I Know How This Ends. And it actually runs alongside Lemongrass Hope. So we call it a paraquel instead of a sequel, my publisher and I. So it's the story of a journalist who is on her way to an immigration rights protest in New York City. Her taxi gets in a collision and she finds herself outside of Carnegie Hall where there is something else going on. There is a graduation of a small cohort of students who have been part of a study because they are the 9/11 babies. So they're graduating from high school after having been studied. Their mothers were all pregnant on or around 9/11 and had survived 9/11. And I always was interested in the class of 2020, the high school graduating class, because I've always known that they were truly the 9/11 babies, the babies whose mothers, just by math, were pregnant on 9/11. So I always had this idea that I was going to write this book about the 9/11 babies. It was going to be about their graduation and take place at their graduation. And of course, I wrote a book about an event that never happened. And so, and then it came out on the eve of this event that never happened, right? But interestingly enough, it's a story about parallel universes, mystical realism, and time travel. And so then it became sort of a very interesting book to talk about in what we were experiencing as a parallel universe and continue to experience as a parallel universe. So, and really it's about the journalist comes upon a woman at the graduation who's a mystical woman who tells her a story of time bending, love and loss, and love that really transcends time. And the journalist discovers that the story that she thinks she's accidentally stumbled upon and covering from the outside looking in is something altogether different. And so that's really what the story is about.
I'm finding like I wish that we flipped it around, because each time, each of you, as you were telling a little bit about your books, I'm like, I want to hear the reading part now.
Yeah.
This is so unfair. I need more. Okay.
So that's great.
All of the books really sound wonderful. I mean, very different, vibes from each of them. So it's really wonderful to have you all together in a panel. One of the reasons I think we have you all together is because you're all members of Tall Poppies. So what does that mean, and how has it impacted your writing career?
I think I'm the newest Tall Poppy out of the group. So I guess I'll take I think it's probably different for everybody. For me, it's really sisterhood. I always feel alone as a writer. I spend a lot of time in my office by myself, I don't really always have people to bounce ideas off of or just even ask questions. And the Tall Poppy writers have been that for me. It's been a sisterhood. It's been a a wonderful way to get your book into the hands of people who may not have necessarily known you, because the poppies are so supportive of each other. And so whenever we have a book come out, we all support, we all push it on social media. We have the wonderful platform, which is our Bloom Facebook page, which has been amazing. I mean, I've connected with people all over the world on Bloom, and it's just a sisterhood. It's a place where we can kind of come together and work together as women and celebrate each other.
Yeah, I'll second that. It's at its core, it's a business, a marketing cooperative, and it's the only author-driven cross-genre marketing co-op in the publishing industry of its type. But it is a sisterhood, and it is a really the mission behind it. And our founder, Ian Garvin, who's a USA Today bestselling author, the mission behind her idea was to get a group of women authors together who would raise each other up and work together, as a co-op, but then also raise up other women authors. And as you heard, I was a lawyer in my old life, and I always say, like, had there been tall poppy lawyers, I might still be a lawyer, but there weren't. So I've been really happy to find the tall poppy writers in this life.
Well, for me, I've learned a lot from the other authors. They're more experienced people further into their career than I was when I joined. So I learned a lot from them, but also it connected me with readers in a forum that really allowed me to be myself. So many of the events that we do are a little more intellectual. There's a little more of a scholarly ring to some of the things that we do as writers. But in Bloom and with the tall poppy bloggers and the other connective tissue of the tall poppies, we really are exposing each other as people. And they get to know me as a person and the type of work that I do, but also the kind of fun that I like to have. And I think that that's just a really nice side that you don't get to expose as much, because the industry can be very serious and very schooly, and that's fine if we want to talk about books that way. But it's also just fun to talk about what kind of food we eat when we read books, and what color M&Ms we like to eat when we turn the pages, just dumb stuff. So I guess I enjoy all the dumb stuff, talking to readers too. Mm-hmm. How's that for an answer? I'm not very smart.
I think it's great. Now I want to be an author so I can join. Do you have to be invited, or, is it like
there's a Hogwarts level of initiation?
Okay. All right. I know it's going to be harder than I thought.
Just write a book. That's all.
Okay. First, baby steps. All right. So, I'm sure you get asked this question a lot, but it's so of our times. Like, how has the pandemic affected your writing? I think of the Decameron Project, when they talk about how they reached out to so many writers, and a lot of writers were prolific. Other writers were like, I just can't now. So I'd love to hear from you.
Well, see, the Decameron Project, there's school again. Like, I know that that's something, and I don't know what it is. So, but no, seriously. The pandemic has given me more time to write. I mean, it's as plain as that, because the distractions, a lot of the exterior distractions have gone away, and a lot of my kids who were just out of college came home to me rather than me traveling to them. They came home to roost. So even just the things I would normally do, try to reach them or see them, it all kind of blended away. No more parties. Just writing.
Yeah, same for me. I have 3 teenagers. So when I didn't have to go to spring sports or summer camp, I had a lot more time, and I was determined to make it count. So it definitely unlocked writing potential for me, but also writing has always been my stress relief and my best therapy. So for me, it was very much a coping mechanism. And I even, I finished a novel that I had started before the pandemic, but I also started writing short stories, which was something that was totally foreign and new to me, because I really needed some short bursts of productivity that really would be like therapy for me. So I started publishing short stories too. And I have, it has definitely been a time of angst for me, but also a time of creativity and productivity.
I don't know. I feel like I discovered other things about myself during the pandemic, which my writing I feel like is kind of the same. I mean, the biggest thing is the interruption of my kids, because I'm used to being home by myself, like from 8 to 2, 8 to 2:30, and so now, like when I'm writing, people are just bursting in. They don't respect my space at all. So they just interrupt. I know my daughter, when I was working on Yellow Wife, I was like on my last draft. And I was like knee deep in like 1850, like in this scene where I was like there. And she came in, and I promise you, she scared me so bad. I like jumped out of my seat just because I'm just not used to those interruptions. So, the writing kind of was the same, but I think me as a person, I started gardening a bit, which was my first time ever trying to garden. But, we have all this time. We can't go anywhere but except our backyards. So I figured, let me use this time and give it a try. I also picked up hiking, which is something that I had always wanted to do, but I think I was a little bit intimidated. But again, there was no place to go safely except for the outdoors. And so I dragged my family out a bunch, and we did a bunch of hikes as well. So I think being home has helped me to slow down just as a person, which I think is going to make my writing better over time, because now I'm not so anxious. I'm not always running to sports. I'm not always in the car driving people somewhere. Like, we're all kind of just here. So it's been a learning experience, and I've enjoyed it, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how these things will carry forward. If we'll all just like return back to we're driving around all the time, or if we'll manage to take these lessons we've learned. I think connecting with nature has been a big one for a lot of people. So I'd love to know, what's a book you'd recommend now, an old favorite or a recent read, or, whatever is speaking to you now.
Oh my God, I'm reading one right now and I can't remember the name of it.
No, I need to go get my
You can
book.
go get it,
Oh,
Kelly,
good.
while
Let me
somebody
go
else
let me
answers.
go get it.
Okay. I actually just left my local bookstore because I love to support local, and I picked up The Kindest Lie by Nancy Johnson. Her book just pubbed on Tuesday. So that's a book that I will be reading. I just start listening to audiobooks. I think I'm late to the game. I think everybody probably was already doing that. But I'm listening to The Alice Network by Kate Quinn. Totally loving that. And then I am reading a book that's coming out in July. All of a sudden now I'm getting like advanced reader copies, which is awesome. That's so super cool. So I'm reading Island Queen by Vanessa Riley.
I about halfway through Leave the World Behind, which was a pretty celebrated book, but I missed it, I guess. I just wasn't aware of it. I don't know why, but it is really, really good. Very well written and extremely believable, and I'm scared shitless.
I was going to say, it's super intense.
I swore in the library. I'm sorry. No.
Kelly, this is a place for quiet, Kelly, not for swearing.
Right. I have
Inside
the
voice.
actual book over by my bed, but this is the book I'm reading right now. It's No Heaven for Good Boys by Keisha Bush. And also The Kindest Lie. I just started. I've been waiting for that book to come out for years. I've known Nancy Johnson for years, so I'm super excited about that. And also Jennifer Probst's new book, which is also downstairs, about Italy. My Italian summer, I want to say.
I'm also reading The Prophets, so I'm kind of like going between
Our
two
Italian
books.
summer, sorry.
And that, that is a beautiful and difficult book. So I've had to I've already wept. I'm pretty early.
Yeah.
So but so well written. Oh my goodness.
It's a book that I want to read, but I think after spending 3 years in Yellow Wife's world, it just may be too intense for me. Like, I spent 3 years reading books by enslaved people. Those were the ones that really kind of got me, were the ones written in their voices, and just
Yep.
all of the research I did. I just don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know if I can jump back over, but I do. I mean, his book has gotten so much press and it
It,
looks so good.
it's beautiful in a way that I haven't seen in a long time. I can't. It's poetic, I guess, and it reminds me of Toni Morrison in many ways, but from like a gay male perspective, if that makes any sense. I mean, it's crazy inventive. But yeah, I wouldn't. If I'd written the book that you had written, I don't know that I could go there either, and have
Yeah.
my heart broken all over again.
Yeah. There was a lot of heartbreak. It's a lot of heartbreak in that Yellow
I
Wife. Yeah.
bet. What a difficult period of time to write about.
I just shared a link for if everybody wants to
Oh, yeah.
know what book everyone's talking about.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, I'd like to invite you to share a portion, or what you'd like to read of your books, and then we can take questions from the audience after. Who would like to go first? I hate picking people, but I can't. I know Kelly's ready.
You ready, Kelly?
Do I look
Or I'll
ready?
go first.
I mean, I know the page number. I'll go first. Mine's
Okay, good.
short. I'll go really quickly. I think I'm ready. Okay. It was only on the way home, bellies full, content, that she stopped just short of the porch and suddenly sniffed, alert, like a dog. There it was, the smell of death. The memory of her sister's expensive coffee in her nose was suddenly gone. She turned to Miles. He looked away too quickly. His hair fell across his eyes like a veil, and instead of flicking his head like he usually did, he let it stay, let it shield him. He was only half an inch shorter than Hannah now, but he hunched down next to her, folding his shoulders in as if trying to be invisible. She remembered the half nest, the wisps of hair she'd seen on the porch. Damn it, she should have listened harder to her intuition. Then she thought of the calls she'd have to make to his father, his therapist. She thought of the punishment she'd have to mete out. She thought about how badly she didn't want to do any of those things. Miles, she said, tell me what happened. The therapist had said she should be careful about asking questions and giving choices. With this issue, with boundaries and limits, statements were clearer. He didn't answer, and in that space, she wavered. Could she be wrong? They lived in the woods now, near a creek, close to farmland. Things passed through, creatures lived and died. They weren't in a village with sidewalks anymore. They were on the edge of suburbia, but it was more like the country than anywhere else they'd lived. They were part of the natural world. This made things better, but she realized just as sharply that it could also make them worse. There was more death around them now, not less. I didn't mean to, he said. Wasn't that the very definition of a compulsion? Wasn't that the precise point that the psychiatrist she couldn't afford had explained to her so carefully? She took a deep breath. Oh my God, the box cutter. Miles, did you? No, Mom, I swear I didn't. Did you leave it in the woods? Bury it? Where is it? The questions flew out of her mouth. She couldn't help it. The statements were gone, evaporated. She grabbed his arm, too hard, she'd think later, and spun him to face her. It took far more effort than she expected. Her own arm ached with force and regret. Tell me where it is, she declared. I hid it, he said. Get the shovel, she said. He glanced nervously up the hill toward Hillary's house. Can we wait till it's dark? Of course, that was the reasonable choice. He didn't want to risk anyone seeing him, didn't want his beloved little cousin next door to know. And she, of course, the keeper of his secret, didn't either. Doing it was one thing, being bullied about it was another, but she couldn't know how much she'd regret saying yes. Yes, Miles, he could wait. It was only after they'd finished unpacking when dusk fell and Miles put on the headlamp and started digging out back the small grave for the fox corpse he'd claimed he'd found dead, claimed he hadn't killed, and Hannah had nudged it with her toe, looking at the fur, checking for wounds or blood, trying to prove him right or wrong and coming up empty. But she heard the faint chorus from the opposite side of her street down the gully near the creek, calling out one word over and over, a chant, Liza, Liza. Hannah thought, what a strange name for a dog. She left him to work in the low light and was about to call Mike and leave a message for the therapist when the text came from her sister. Because a 6-year-old girl named Liza, who lived in the house across the street, the shrouded house with the weather vane and the couple on maybe their third marriage, had gone down to the creek to look for frogs and hadn't come back. Hannah's hand went up to cover her face. Dear God, she already felt a vein of affection for that house and those neighbors, the dark greens and grays, the possibilities it held. Already the neighborhood had managed to change shape, to scare them, to disappoint them. In that suspended moment, as she breathed by the low light of her phone, a flash of recognition ran through her. She couldn't see through the glossy leaves across the street, but it was as if she saw that little girl, another child drawn to animals, and animals had led her to something sinister. Hannah could picture the crayon drawings of frogs and deer and squirrels dotting the fridge, the animal books that lined their shelves. A girl who fearlessly nestled her rosy cheeks into the dusty fur of strangers' dogs and begged her mother for a rabbit on top of their house. She knew that kind of kid. She had that kind of kid. So that's the part that sets everything in motion in the neighborhood. She's struggling with her son, and then a child goes missing.
Yikes.
Yikes, I know. Bad things, terrible neighborhood. Boo.
Sadeqa or Amy, which one of you would like to go next?
Oh. All right. I'm going to read from the beginning of the book. February 11th, 2001. Again. There's a moment before I drown that I know the truth. Just before my head goes under the water is a moment in which I feel such clarity that I think I must be dying. No one should know so certainly all the things I suddenly know and still go about their life as before. Even this, the acknowledgement of my clarity, is a thought that as it forms, I fear is just too clear and too focused to be trusted. Ian and I have come on this trip to get away, but I know that in reality, he is trying to help me. I suspect that he would like to start a family, but when I bring it up, he keeps telling me to focus only on myself. Ian wants so badly to cure me. He can't, of course. No one has been able to. No therapist, no psychiatrist, and certainly not Ian. Drugs have been powerless. Behavioral therapy has been fruitless. I've read articles about electroconvulsive therapy from the 1940s, shoddily referred to by the mainstream media as shock therapy, and dismissed summarily as well. And I've wondered if I should beg for that. It seems cruel that this method went out of vogue for reasons that seem to pertain to politics and the power of the pharmaceutical companies, rather than efficacy. I'm worried about Ian's reaction, so I don't bring it up to him. I keep my research to myself. I long for something that might work, but I can't find the words to ask Ian to go to any extremes for me. I'm certain that if I ask him to find a doctor who still performs ECT, he will do so. And this fear of being indulged, rather than a fear of being dismissed, is why I don't ask. I understand, even in my compromised state, that I need to put less pressure on him, not more. Ian wants to help me so much that he will do anything for me. I know this, and the little girl in me who still believes in unicorns and fairy tales also believes this sort of love alone should cure me. But the woman who has been struggling for a decade now knows it doesn't work this way. Sigh. A decade. Has it really been that long? Has it really been only that long? A decade ago, I chose Ian. I chose Ian fully and completely because I believed, no, at that time I knew that I could not have a whole and happy life without him. And yet, ever since I made that choice, I've been on a downward spiral toward madness. I can't explain it. I can only feel it. And I'm taking Ian down with me. This is my greatest sadness. I've begged him to go. I can't leave you, Kate, he says. Leave me and create a life that you want. You deserve that. I have cried night after night. I can't get well, and I hate myself for that. There are nights I wonder if my life has any worth at all, But still I persist. I cling to that small fact. Every morning I wake and move forward. I am not suicidal. For all my isms and osises, I am not suicidal. My therapists and doctors emphasize this fact almost to remind me lest I forget at any time. They share it with each other with a glee that seems misplaced to me. Yes, I want to keep living, I concede, and yet I don't have the faintest idea why. Hope, that's why, Ian says in response. He says this every single time I question. What is that? What is hope? I ask him often and with despair. I am losing bits of myself and I don't know how to find them again. What is hope? I asked him just before we came on this trip. I don't even remember what that word means anymore. I've tried to remember the emotion it denotes, but my memory fails me. We are on a cruise ship named the Beatrice II. We came on board in 2011, but we're leaving in 2001 after traveling through the Bermuda Triangle. And the shock of that realization is the reason I landed here in the water. It's the reason I'm drowning. But the miracle is not that we've gone back in time. The miracle is that suddenly, just before I drown, with a clarity I fear I cannot trust, I finally realize what Ian has meant all along. Hope is not a what, she's a who.
Nice. That was very nice. Thank you. Thank you. You know, first before I go, I totally miss this. Don't you guys feel like we're like out somewhere and like right?
Yeah,
This is the thing I miss about being a writer is
me
like going
too.
places where different people read little snippets and the energy in the room and like all of that, right? Like synergy.
Yes,
Okay.
creative synergy, yes.
And the
I
waiter's
miss it.
coming with a drink.
Yeah.
Yeah, that.
Amen.
Yeah. All right, so I'll read a little bit from Yellow Wife, and I'm just going to start right from the beginning. So, part one, Bell Plantation, Charles City, Virginia. Was the most fertile night of the month, and that everything she touched held God's power. Each full moon, she dragged me out in the middle of the night with her to hunt for roots, plants, seedlings, and rare blossoms to use for healing. I did not understand why God's power could not be found during daylight hours. And as I trudged behind her, the March cold overwhelmed me. Even my thick wool shawl was no match against the country freeze. Fear of the woods made my feet clumsy, and I tripped over fallen sticks, scratched my shins on the spiky brush, and bumped my head on low-hanging branches. Mama, on the other hand, moved with skill and confidence, like the earth parted away and presented, like the earth parted a path and presented the way for her. Even in the dark, she knew where to stop for herbs and how to avoid the dangerous ones. We had only a small lantern to guide us, and when I asked how she knew where things grew, she responded, "My gut be my light." We slipped through the thicket, past the drafty cabins where the field hands slept on pallets stuffed with hay and husk. I heard dry coughs and a low whine from a hungry baby. Further down toward the James River, we traveled through the clearing where we met on Sundays for church. Then over the hill along the side of the cemetery, peppered with sticks to honor our dead. As we traveled deeper into the woods of the plantation, the thick forest blocked the light of the moon. I could hear the growls and grunts of unseen animals and fretted over running into hungry raccoons or red foxes or stepping on a poisonous snake. I tried to clear the worry from my mind as the land flattened out, but then something pricked my ankle. Before I could call out, Mama suddenly stopped and reached for my hand. "This here is a black walnut tree. Grow deep in the woods, so you gotta know where to look. Cure for most everything. Ever unsure, come seek this tree." Mama handed me the lantern, then pulled a blade from her satchel and severed a piece of bark. She brought it to her nose, then ran her tongue along the inside of it. Pus stain anything it touch. After we make a tea for Rachel, rest we used to dye those street sheets for the nursery. Just hoping we ain't too late to save that girl. Mama reached into her bag and pulled out a red ribbon. Go on and mark it, so it'd be easy to find when you come without me. I reached up and tied the ribbon on a skinny twig, knowing I had no intention of roaming these woods without my mama.
Oh, they all sound so good. Like I was, I said at the beginning, like, oh, they're such different genres, but clearly they're all heartrending. And they have that in common. So in one way or another. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to read them. Thank you so much for taking the time to share parts of the chapters. I was inspired with a question when Sadeqa started reading, like, how do your characters' voices come to you? I guess this is sort of like, how does your book come to you? You talked a little bit about your inspiration for your book, but I expect you each have different answers, but when the characters, do they come with accent? Like how does it work?
I would say for Yellow Wife, for me, like every story is different, but for Yellow Wife, I had not written historical fiction before, and I was really inspired by a true life story. I discovered the story of Mary Lumpkin and the Lumpkins jail here in Richmond, not too far from where I live. And so I was along the slave trail, and we were reading the different markers that explain things that happened as the slaves came to Richmond. And so for me, it was an energy. It was this calling. It was more of a calling than anything else. So when I decided to sit down and write the story, it was like this energy was kind of, I always think of myself when I'm writing, I like to think of myself as the conduit, because that separates me from feeling crazy about having to like control this story. And so I like the energy, the voices to kind of flow through me, and I'm just the typist. That doesn't always work, but that's kind of the approach. And so as Phoebe came and she started to talk to me, she was very, very young. And I knew I needed her to be turning like 18, like an age that was going to propel her in the story. But in the very beginning, she sounded like 13, 14, maybe even 15. So I was a little bit worried that she wouldn't like mature as I wrote the story. But she did, each draft, she got a little bit deeper. She got a little bit more mature, but I was still able to hold on to that bit of innocence that I felt when I first encountered her in the story.
I mean, for me, sometimes they come really easily. Like I immediately know, particularly in a first person voice, in Not My Boy, one of the chapters alternate between a third person perspective of one of the sisters and the first person perspective of their mother. And the mother's voice was pretty clear to me early on. And I also knew a lot about Miles, the boy. And then some of the other characters revealed themselves over time, and then I had to go back and adjust them once I knew them better. But I agree with Sadeqa that the goal is to be in the flow, and to have it somewhere up here existing apart from you, and then to just get it on the page. It doesn't always happen easily, but it's a really good feeling when it does, and you really feel like you're in a groove. But that has no, like difficult things can turn out to be really good books too. And easy flowing things can turn out to be manuscripts that I never sold. So it doesn't necessarily impact the worth of the book. It's just what I prefer feeling is the flow.
Or the marketability of the book.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's a better way to put it, for sure.
And I know how this ends. I did something I haven't done very many times, which is write from a male point of view. So I know how this ends, has 3 points of view, 2 women and a male point of view. And the male point of view is Ian, and there's 2 characters. 2 of those points of view were in Lemongrass Hope, Ian and Kate. And the third is a new character, and I know how this ends, Rory, the journalist. And so Lemongrass Hope was the story of Kate and Ian, 2 lovers who sort of have this connection and then lose each other and then try to find each other again. But Ian's point of view is not represented in Lemongrass Hope. And so over the years when I would go to book clubs and I would hear people talk about Ian and hear all the different things and all the different takes on him, ranging from he was, you know, a really great character, a great character that they liked, a very likable character, to very manipulative. And I had my own ideas of who Ian was. And so I Know How This Ends was my chance to finally tell his story from his point of view. So that was the point of view I wrote first when I sat down to write that book, because I was like excited to tackle him and give him the voice that I felt like I hadn't given him before. But I do find it tricky to write from a male point of view. But I enjoyed it. So yeah, so I don't know if that really answers your question. We'll go with
You only answer how it comes to you. I guess
Yeah.
I have one more question before we go to the audience's questions. And I don't know if this is like a personal question, but like, how do you spoke about flow, like how do you create space for that? How do you make it so you feel like you're ready to sort of be the conduit and write, whether that's, whatever, a practice or cleaning your table or I don't know what.
Well, for me, I feel like I need to start at the right time. I don't start too early. I feel like I need to know a lot. I need to think about it and make notes and really kind of soak in it before I sit down to write. And I don't let myself write if I know too little, because I'll make mistakes. So the more, sometimes knowing when to stop the research and when to write, when you have just enough and not too much, so you're not overwhelmed. It's hard to know sometimes, but that's what I try to do. I try to know just enough that I can let it come.
I try and spend time with my characters. Like now the book that I'm working on now, actually it started with Yellow Wife. I built kind of like a collage on my wall, which I guess because it was historical fiction, I needed that visual since I was kind of embarking upon new territory for myself. And so I start with kind of like visual aids now, and I do an outline because I need a roadmap. I'm not a pantser. My first novel, Love in a Carry-On Bag, I was totally pantsing it, and it took me 10 years. So I was like, not a good plan for me anymore. So I definitely need to have a bit of an outline so that I could have a roadmap. But I also just try and spend time with my characters. So like if I don't write over the weekend and when Monday comes and they're kind of like quiet and they're not just as noisy as I need them to be, like I'll write in my journal and kind of ask them to come out and play. Like, hey Ruby, like how are you? Like what are you doing? You know, what is it that you want me to know? And so I'm kind of playful with them to try and get them to come out. And it's funny because when I am in the flow, it's like everything stops. Like there's no time, there's no anything. It's just like it's just like a faucet that just is dripping, like it's just kind of coming out. And then I realize that this happened to me today. Then I realize that I am like totally in the zone, totally in the flow, and then I'll come out of it. So it's almost like, I don't know, I listen a lot to Abraham Hicks, and she talks about like being in the vortex is like this space, or even if you're if you're a meditator, when you meditate and you come out, you're like, oh, that was 10 minutes. Like that's the way it feels for me when I'm writing. It's like I'm like in that space where like nothing else matters, and to me, that's when like that good stuff comes. But then I have to be careful not to censor myself because I'm like, wait, that's not supposed to happen yet in the story. Like, you know, thinking about, so it's like all of those things kind of put together that makes it work.
My husband doesn't always understand that state of being. He'll be like, didn't you hear the UPS truck, you know, and the guy knocking on the door? And I'm like, I kind of didn't. Didn't you know it was snowing? No, I wasn't really aware. Like sometimes you get very, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I like to have a collage too, and I really like to live with my characters. And you know, sometimes I just like to picture them in a scene in a room, like just going about their lives, and then trying to like you know, like I'll be in the car driving, I'll be picturing a scene. Like sometimes I really just try to like put together a scene that may not even make its way into the book, but just sort of picture them in their lives having dialogue with each other. Like, what does that look like? What does that feel like? And just kind of like rehearsing that scene over and over again in my head until it's something that is going to let me sit and write about them, even if it's not that particular scene. Like after they walk out of that room, what are they doing next? And so I really do try to give my characters like a full backstory in my head. I sort of like try to know what their favorite things are, what kind of clothes they're wearing, what kind of car they're driving, so that I can really kind of like visualize them. And when I'm in it, when I'm in the book, I am definitely living with them and talking to them a lot in my car, in my head, over coffee. Yeah.
Well, I have a question from the audience that sort of goes with that. And Jaden, you wrote something in the chat, but yes, I do see it. But I'm going with Carol Dosher's question first. What is the most interesting thing you learned when researching a book? For everybody.
That's interesting. I did a lot of research when I wrote Why We Lie, that's set in DC, which is, I lived there and was one of my favorite places, but I didn't know a lot about the Capitol Police. And so I did a lot of research about the Capitol Police because they figured prominently in that story, and that was kind of interesting and fun. I also wrote Truth About Thea set entirely in rehab, which was a fun research project. I haven't been in rehab, but the whole book is set in rehab, so I had to do a lot of research, and that was actually a fun experiment too.
The book I'm working on is set in 1983 with flashbacks to 1973. So, and I thought that I remembered everything about it. But, you know, I was young during those decades and kind of wild. So there are big,
gaps.
Big gaps. So I had to Google a lot. I came across some things that I'd forgotten. That this is not the kind of answer that I think Carol wants. She probably wants some great historical fact. But what I remembered was Bic Click pens, and how obsessed I was with all the different colors of Bic Click pens. And I would only write with a Bic Click pen. And I remembered that in my research. So important. It had to figure prominently in the book.
I would say for me, all of the research was very fascinating. I think the thing that was a little bit scary is to write a book that happened before I was born. I mean, so far before I was born. So all the details that I came across, I would say a few that was the most interesting to me was that I've read a lot of pre-Civil War stories. I've read a lot of books about slavery, novels, and that sort of thing. Even as a child, I was always drawn to those types of stories because I wanted to know, like, what happened? Like, how did the United States begin? So I was always very curious about that period. But what I learned when I was doing my research for Yellow Wives, specifically about Richmond, was I always pictured the enslaved people kind of being on plantations, and that was kind of it. But I learned that, like, in Richmond and probably in a few of the major cities, slaves were able to hire themselves out, which I had no idea. So they would actually go downtown Richmond if they lived on a plantation or not too far. They would travel to Richmond. There were different corners that they would go to. They would have a slip from their master giving them permission to hire themselves out. And they would hire themselves out, and they would have to take the majority of the money back to their master, if not all of it. Sometimes they were able to keep a little bit of it, but that was another way for their masters to make additional income off of them when they had so many on a plantation and they may not have needed them, completely for everyday work. Another thing was that the book is inspired by Reuben. His name is Robert Lumpkin. And so he was the one who actually owned the Lumpkins jail. In my story, it's the LaPierre jail. And I found that people who actually traded slaves, who dealt in the business of slavery, were looked at as the pariahs of the hierarchy of the people who lived in the town. And so they didn't have the choice to marry, you know, some of the well-to-do families. And so they ended up all picking mulatto women because that was kind of the best that they could hope for. So it's all these different, like, small little details that happened specifically to in Richmond during slavery. And I was very specific about keeping my research to just Virginia because it's going to be different. And New Orleans is a whole nother ball game, you know, by the sea in South Carolina. That's going to be a whole different look. And so I had to be very strategic because you can jump down rabbit holes and before you know it, you're telling a whole different story. And so those are just a few really interesting facts that I found about slavery in Richmond specifically.
Thank you so much. I feel like Jaden's question sort of goes to some of what you were hitting on. They ask, my question is, how do you avoid falling into stereotypes or tropes when writing, but still make it interesting? Like, I guess, how do you keep it original or not go down a rabbit hole and go into the wrong city?
Yeah, that's the trick, right? I mean, it's really about making sure, you know, writing full characters and giving your characters, like we were talking about before, like full lives, even outside of the pages, right? So that that they're saying things that are real, you know. I like to read my dialogue out loud. I like to read my book drafts out loud and hear them out in the air because I think that sometimes helps fix things like that are developing in early drafts. I don't know if you guys do that.
Yeah, I do that as well. I have to hear it out loud. It's particularly, and to me, that's when it's like, oh, okay, I can move on to the next chapter. Like not
Yeah.
not the first draft, but like the drafts, you know, the drafts that are a little bit cleaner. I have to hear it out loud before I move on to the next chapter.
I also still rely on some first readers if I'm at all concerned about something like that. I try to stop it at the planning level. When I'm developing a character, I'll ask myself, you know, oh, is that too expected, or does that feel real, or does it feel cliche? I mean, you ask those questions early so that you don't get yourself into that kind of situation. And if there's any doubts, I have some people in the writing community I rely on. Sometimes you just read a certain character, a certain section. I had my daughters read one of my books because there were so many young characters in it in college that I wanted to make sure that I didn't make any cultural mistakes and that I got all the technology right and all the college campus stuff right. I'd been pretty observant when I was, with them at schools, but, I didn't want it to be wrong. So sometimes another reader can really help you with that also.
And did you get it right?
They gave me 2 thumbs up. So. or maybe they didn't read it and they lied to me, but I'll never know.
Mark Watkins has a question for you, Kelly. He says, you write about such painful subjects, and in the context of your sister, how do you find the emotional distance to be clinical about that? And how did your sister respond?
Well, nothing in the actual book did happen to my sister, but the relationship between the 2 sisters is very similar. I have had trouble in the past getting that distance when I'm writing about something that's super personal. And I find that you need some time in between and you need to really steel yourself. I mean, I think that I know a lot of writers who have definitely sobbed after writing difficult passages that came from personal experience. Memoir writers do it all the time, but fiction writers do as well. And my sister was terrified when she found out that I was writing about sisters. And but I don't think she's ready yet because she's busy. She's a very busy girl, my sister. But yeah, she was super scared, and I had to talk her down. I did a whole video of talking to her about the book, which was quite cute. So thank you, Mark.
So next time we have you, we'll have to ask if she's ready yet. So we can.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to pressure her when she's so.
I understand.
One of her friends is here, so I'm just teasing her.
So anonymous attendee asks, how do you choose if you publish on your own or with a big publishing house?
I've done both, but not by choice. Um, my goal was always to be with a publishing house from the beginning. I have a background in publishing, so I started off as a publicist for two of the major publishing houses. And when I finished my novel, I thought, I'm connected. I know people. I've been behind the curtain. I know how this works. And I wasn't able to get a publishing deal. So I ended up having to start my own publishing company and self-publishing my first book, Love in a Carry-On Bag. And I mean, it's a lot of work if you self-publish. And if you want to do it at a certain level, it's a lot of work. And I totally went to every book festival. I mean, of course, this was pre-COVID. This was back in 2012. I went to every book festival up and down the East Coast. I was literally like selling books out of my trunk. But it worked. I was able to win a few awards, and then I got a 2-book deal with St. Martin's Press afterwards. So, there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just don't give up. And I think that was the biggest lesson that I learned, was that you want to be a writer, you want to be a published author by any means necessary. That's what you should do.
I always say, if you want to be proud of the accomplishment, keep going until you get it published. If you want closure and have it done after a certain amount of time, go ahead and self-publish. It's really what is your goal and what are you really looking for? I think that can guide you.
Amy, it looks like you're thinking about what you want to say. You're muted.
Sorry, my dog was barking so loudly. I didn't want you guys to hear. Yeah, I echo all of those things. I mean, it's just, it's a very interesting industry, and I think it's becoming, it's never really predictable, and certainly not predictable in the last year, becoming less predictable in the last year. So I have, I know a lot of friends who have been traditionally published and are considering self-publishing now because of the very things that Kelly said. Sometimes you just really want to have your work out in the world, and it belongs there, but it's a lot of work. It's hard work to self-publish, so you have to really be prepared to buckle in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Sadeqa, you worked in publishing before. You could probably list all the jobs you had to do.
All of them. I had to do everything. I mean, I was even the salesperson. So at one point I was calling bookstores with a fake name, pretending that I was someone else.
I love that. I love that story.
Asking them if they wanted to carry Love in a Carry-On Bag in their store. And I got a couple of yeses, by any means necessary.
That's great. That's great. So we have one more question that I think some of you have already answered from Carol Dosher. Do you have any family members who have read your drafts? But I'd also like you to think about, anything else that you want to say at this time. Kelly already answered this one.
I did. And every once in a while I let my husband read, but yeah, I leave it to the pros generally. Not
my dad always reads closer to the end. He always reads my manuscript in manuscript form, so much so that now that the actual book is out, I'm like, Dad, I think you need to read it. He's like, I read it already. I'm like, but it's changed, and my husband, I'm reading portions of it to him as I'm writing the story. And then by the time it gets to arc form, I'm like, you need to read this book before it comes out. You have to sit down and read the whole thing. So that's usually it. For Yellow Wife, I actually did have a few beta readers just because it was such new territory for me that I had picked someone at my local bookstore. I had asked a friend who was familiar with history, just different people who I thought could bring a book club person, just different people who I thought could bring different energy or give me different information to make sure that I was on the right track with it.
Yeah, my sisters do the same thing. My sisters usually read it in manuscript form, and then later on, they'll pick it up after it's released, and they're like, oh, a lot of things have changed. Like, well, usually because of things you said. So, so that's helpful. And then I usually give it to my mother, not until it's like, can't be edited anymore. Because I want her approval, but I also don't want her edits. Although that's not a fair thing to say, because she never, it's wise to give it to her at that stage, because usually it's meets with her approval at that point. So yeah, but like as in the beginning, obviously I had a lot more beta readers, but now I pretty much try to stick with the prose, send it right to my agent.
That's great. So is there anything, last things you want to share with your book? Other than everybody should buy them. I shouldn't even have to tell you about this. I know you guys want to. Particularly from independents, but anywhere you can.
Thank you so much. We're so grateful to the Princeton Library. You guys have been such big supporters, and it's been really great to have these avenues, you know, in this time when we don't get to do live events. I love live events at the Princeton Library. Can't wait till we can do that again.
It is a beautiful library. And
it's a beautiful library, town. Great energy, great space.
Yep, I encourage people to go there all the time. It's such a nice place.
Great, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to everyone.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. I mean, it's what's tonight? I'm losing track of the days. It's Thursday night. And I know there's a lot of things that you could be doing tonight. So we really appreciate you being here with us. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.